I had a topic in mind to discuss today, and then I received an email from that I thought was quite interesting and brought up really important and worth spending time on from one of the people on the retreat. Actually, it's someone who's with us right now, online right now. I thought it was brought up a lot of very important points. So I'm going to, I'd like to just read this email to you. And there's a lot in here, actually, that I think is important. So the person says that they find the distinction between insight meditation and Samadhi meditation to be very interesting and found value in hearing about it repeatedly. I'm happy that that's nice to hear that it's been of use. However, I'm somewhat confused about the distinction between meditation practice and Dharma. I have heard it said that if you fully, completely understand the Four Noble Truths, then there you are. That is the ultimate goal and all you need to do. In fact, if you fully understand the Four Noble Truths, you can forget about, and then he lists some of these other lists. You can forget about the 7 factors of enlightenment, the 3 characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. I've also heard that you don't actually need to meditate to understand the Four Noble Truths. I have heard of Buddhists at various times and places that have focused entirely on Dharma without meditating. I haven't heard of the reverse except in modern America, but they tend to call themselves meditators, not Buddhists. I can see how Samadhi meditation can clear the mind to understand the Dharma, but I haven't heard that enunciated as a reason to meditate. You will hear it in a few minutes. I can see better how insight meditation can lead to insights about how one is living their life or even to understand the Dharma. Yet it seems to me that one should be meditating on the Dharma for this purpose. The only example that I know of is metta meditation, when one is meditating on Dharma. Again, we'll come back to that. So it feels like meditation is either orthogonal to Dharma or perhaps a tool to understanding Dharma, but the Dharma doesn't actually have much to do with meditation. Anyway, so that's the basics there. So there's a lot there. So what I'd like to do is I want to first spend a little time on what we mean by Dharma, and then if and how meditation relates, is connected or not. How are they the same or different? And then some of the reasons, anyway, so that's what I would like to do. So first, let's just start a moment on like, well, what do we mean by Dharma? So there's a lot that I agree with here that I think many people would agree with. We would say Dharma and meditation are not the same thing. Meditation is it's a practice. You could say it's a training. And so people have various methods, techniques, practices that they do in their training. And we should say that, as we all know, that there's not only one reason why people meditate. There can be many reasons and many goals to meditate that have nothing to do with supporting us in the Dharma, right? You could be doing mindfulness-based stress reduction kind of meditations just to lower your blood pressure and sleep better at night, for example. Stress reduction. So, that's just one example. We could probably have many, many examples of different reasons why people meditate, different goals. And even within spiritual traditions, not just Buddhism, but all spiritual traditions, there's many forms of meditation, probably with their own goals. And then even within the Buddhist world, it's a big world, and there can be many reasons to meditate. So meditation itself is a big, big topic. In what we're doing here, you have to make your own decisions, but certainly the way it's being offered and taught is it is in service of actualizing whatever this Dharma is in our lives. And so we want to talk about, well, why might we do it? And I want to come back to this thing of, well, do you really even need to do it? That's an interesting question. So first of all, let's back up to Dharma. There's in the old text, the Pali Suttas, there is one teaching called the simile of the raft. And the Buddha in that says, this is quoting, these words are put in the mouth of the Buddha, that he uses an image as if you're trying to cross a body of water, maybe it's a lake, and to come to what he calls the safety on the other side. And he said, what if a person were to put in a lot of effort and, you know, use wood and sticks and twine and work really hard to build a raft. And then you got on the raft and with a lot of effort, using your arms and legs, you paddled across to the other shore. He said, would it make sense that once you got to the other shore, that you put the raft on your back and now carried it along with you as you went about your business? And of course, it's a good teaching story. Everybody says no. And of course not. And the Buddha says, in the same way, even the Dharma itself is for crossing over, not for clinging or holding on to. So all of the Dharma teachings are for leading to this thing we call liberation. So there's maybe we will slow down here a little bit about what the traditional teachings on that are. And so the word Dharma has a range of meanings. One meaning we don't mention here, but I think I will just for completeness, is it's throughout history in many of the Buddhist texts, Dharma means things. It's a simple meaning, things. Dharmas are things, but not in the everyday sense. You wouldn't say, hand me some of those things over there, hand me some of those dharmas. You wouldn't say that, but in the sense of experiences, as we relate to them from a Dharma perspective, they're called just the experiences that can rise, the things we work with, aspects of our minds and our bodies. You could think of it as things. There's a, Buddhism is sometimes called a religion of lists, because there's the Four Noble Truths and the 7 factors of enlightenment and the 3 this and the 5 that, and it goes on. And a lot of that had to do with the way these teachings were compiled in the early centuries before it became written. It was an oral tradition and it was an aid in memorization. It's not clear that the Buddha even taught in terms of some of these lists. Some of them we don't really know. Some of them probably do go back to the Buddha. And there is actually a list of lists. And I'll tell you the Pali, it's kind of a tongue twister. You don't need to know it, but there's a reason for it. It's called a Bodhipakya Dhamma. Dhamma, there's Dharma. Dharma, things, Pakya, pertaining to Bodhi, awakening. It's a list of things pertaining, Dharmas pertaining to awakening. It's a list of 7 lists. It's got 7 factors of enlightenment. Anyway, it's got all these well-known lists. I can talk to you offline if you're interested in that particular list. It's considered an important list of lists. So that's one meaning of Dharma. In the way we mostly are using it, Dharma is, sometimes it's called like the truth, the way of things. It's like the Tao, I guess. I don't know that much about Taoism. Sort of the truth with a capital T, the way of things are, you could think of as Dharma. And the way we mostly use it, Dharma, is the teachings. That's the Dharma. And so in that spirit, I want to go back to one of the things. I'm going to actually address a number of things in this email. I agree. I think there's a great email, a lot in this I fully agree with. He says, I heard it, I'm repeating, I heard it said that if you fully, completely understand the 4 Noble Truths, there you are, and that is the ultimate goal. It's not exactly, it could be, it's fine. It's not, but no, actually understanding the 4 Noble Truths is that raft. It's not actually the liberation itself. And it's not considered the only doorway. So it's the one that gets talked about a lot, understanding the 4 Noble Truths. There's another question here. Do you need to meditate to understand the 4 Noble Truths? I am going to come to that. I think that's a very important question. But there's another, I can give you a few other examples. If you go back to the Pali texts, Pali Suttas, the places, I'm a little rusty, but as far as I can remember, the places where the texts have the Buddha speaking of his own enlightenment. Some of the time he said it's through having realized as it really is the Four Noble Truths, and it led to this. Then that was the doorway into the liberation. Another way it's talked about is that through doing practices, and a lot of times it's doing some of these samadhi and jhana practices, but that it led to the destruction of certain forces that lead to suffering. And there's a list, you don't have to know it, but some of you may want to know, you don't really have to know any Pali, but I pepper it in a little bit for those who are interested, called asavas, A-S-A-V-A-S, generally translated as defilements, as it would be a good translation. And there's a list of 3 or 4 of them, and we think of them forces in our minds. One of them is craving after sensual pleasures. One of them is ignorance. One of them, so there's a whole thing, what do we mean by ignorance? So I won't get into all that. It could actually mean a number of things. Sometimes it means ignorance of the Four Noble Truths is one way it does get talked about, other ways too. And one is what they call becoming, which is having to be something. Sometimes there's a 4th added in some of the compilations, which is views. So this is, and through this destruction of these, that we also come to this liberation. It may not mention the Four Noble Truths. So there's different doorways in, and it's not just one way. There's actually some other doorways in that are connected more on the Samadhi understanding that I'll bring to later that aren't necessarily connected with Four Noble Truths. Doesn't have to be connected. It's what frees and liberates our hearts and minds. If we can have a profound, deep, direct understanding experientially, really getting it deeply about the Four Noble Truths, then absolutely that is one of the major ways that the pathway, the door to liberation is spoken about. There can be other ways that people do experience this liberation that's not that particular formulation. So I'll come back to that a little, but certainly the Four Noble Truths is a big one, but it's not the whole Dharma. And in fact, one place in the suttas, someone asks the Buddha, this is a very famous passage, if he can articulate the Dharma in brief. And the Buddha responds with it's like a pith statement, if you will. He says, yeah, here's the Dharma in brief. The whole Dharma. Nothing whatsoever should be clung to as I, me, or mine. That's the liberation through non-clinging. So it gets into, maybe we need to hang out here a little bit. What does it mean to free ourselves from clinging? It does not mean disconnecting. We have to be very careful. So you'll hear words that sometimes, for example, people will say through these practices, you become disenchanted. That's a word you'll hear. You'll hear to become dispassionate. And it's through that we're not clinging anymore. But words have a range of connotations. What does it mean to be dispassionate? Well, it can have a feeling for some of us, a sense of being kind of just sort of indifferent or not feeling anything, kind of numbed out or not having a lot of feelings. It can feel that way. But actually, what does the word dispassionate mean? It means not being caught up in the passions. And if you notice any time in your own life, I'm thinking back to my life during times when I'm caught in a lot of passion, whether it's about a situation, a person, whatever it is, if you ever fall in love, for example, something like that, it can color our perceptions. We're not actually seeing clearly. And so to be dispassionate doesn't mean we don't feel intensely even. It just means we're not at the effect of caught in the passions. We're disentangled. But we're still, remember we were talking, for those of you who were here for the instructions this morning, about this idea of connecting. Our practice and our path is one of deeply connecting, not disconnecting. So we can say dispassionate, but we want to be careful. Sometimes you'll hear disenchanted. Well, the word disenchanted can mean kind of, oh, I'm sort of let down or disappointed. It can have that connotation. That's not really what we're talking about here. It means to not be enchanted. Well, what does it mean to be enchanted? In any of the old fairy tales, the sorcerer casts a spell, you're enchanted, and you're not connected with reality in the normal way. You're in some spell. And then being a good fairy tale, in the end, the spell is broken. The person's no longer enchanted. They're back to reality. So this is what we're talking about being connected, being here, fully connected, but not lost and caught up in the stories that we're making about things. This is that asif of becoming. So what does it mean if we free ourselves from becoming? That's a big topic. Well, it doesn't mean we have to stop existing, because we're not trying to stop anything. We're still going to let life be what it is. But so much of our lives, we're putting our overlay of our views, our opinions. We create a lot of stories about things, and we don't even realize that we've done it. It's like sitting under the shade of a tree, sitting under a tree and complaining about being oppressed by the shade. And we can just get up and walk out if it's a problem. We don't realize, and a lot of what happens through our stability and undistractedness of mind, the Samadhi, the mindfulness, all these practices, is that we're more and more clear about when we are creating realities in our minds that is an intermediary. It's a step back from actually being connected just with, we often say, it's a cliche, right, to say life as it is. That's all we're trying to do in a non-interference, letting life be. Doesn't mean we don't engage in life in a wise way, in a skillful way. Of course, we want to be connected. The problem is we're often disconnected because we're caught in our stories and our reactivities. We're actually less effective. And when we can liberate ourselves from those forces and actually be present without the overlays, most people I know of actually want to be more connected, because a lot of the things that stand in our way aren't issues anymore. A lot of things that maybe caused fear, maybe we're not afraid anymore because we have a refuge within us. It's things like this. We're able to stand it maybe in the face of a lot of difficulties. So this is this idea of stopping these processes of becoming. So this idea of clinging, right? We don't want to, I think I was going to give a whole talk today on mindfulness of the body. I might still do it tomorrow. It's a very important topic. But that would be an example, just to, say a little bit. Our bodies are important. We want to honor, respect our bodies, care for our bodies. We have bodies as part of being a human being. It's part of, we can say, however you like to say, have bodies. It's part of what we are, if you will. But if you're clinging to the body, I'm not talking about pushing away. I'm not talking about disassociating, disconnecting. But if you're clinging, I was just joking around today with my son. They have a program through the Department of Homeland Security where you can get what's called they have a trusted traveler program. It doesn't look like I'm going to be doing any traveling anytime soon, but when you go through customs, if you have this, you get pre-cleared and you get a little card called the Global Traveler, and then you kind of get to go through a special line. It's not as long of a line or something like that. And so our family, we applied for the Trusted Traveler program. And so they take your picture. And once you get cleared and go through this whole background check, you get a card. So my card came in, there's my picture. And I looked at, I was kind of joking with my son. I just looked and I just said something like, who's that old guy? Is that me? And what I wanted my son to say, no, Dad, you don't look that bad. But he thought he was doing me a favor. He said, no, Dad, it's a good picture of you. That just made it worse. I really do look like that. And so now when I look in the mirror, I see some old guy looking back at me. Who's that old guy? I'm not always laughing. What happened to my youth? What went wrong? Well, nothing went wrong. When we're not clinging to the body, we realize, as a matter of fact, the body becomes a wise teacher. It's telling us this is what happens if you stick around long enough. Bodies age. So that's the teaching of the body, and how we can have a liberated or a wise relationship. And it's this idea of disentangling and just seeing clearly how things are. And then we don't get in a fight with things. So we just can find the inner peace that we're talking about. That's the liberation through an example of non-clinging. So the question is, right, that would shift our relationship with our bodies immensely if we could live in them in free from clinging. Again, not disconnected. To give you one more example of this idea of non-clinging, different than not disconnected, if you're fortunate enough to have someone that you care about in your life, and you were to say to them, I'm disconnected from you, I'm guessing that's probably not going to be received very well. If you say, I'm not clinging to you, I bet they'd appreciate it. You feel the difference there? To really be there wholeheartedly, but it's not in a clinging way. So anyway, enough on that. So it's a liberation through non-clinging. What will support us? So that's really what the Dharma is aiming for. So the actual experiential, the lived liberation through non-clinging, you can't put any words on. Anything we say about it is already a step back from it. It's something very immediate and alive and real. It's the immediacy of life in your own beingness, if you will. So we have to step back and talk about it. So we say it's a liberation through non-clinging. Now we're in the world of the concepts about it. It's supposed to lead us to the actual thing itself. One of the ways that's a big deal, Four Noble Truths, no question about it. Why is that a big deal? Well, I think the idea is it's both a statement about the human condition, and it can be used as something to contemplate and reflect, to bring the whole idea is, if we, as the person said in the email, if we really can get it profoundly, ostensibly, hopefully, it leads to the liberation. Because what are the Four Noble Truths? The first one, just real quick, I think most of you probably know them. If you don't, stick around in the Dharma scene for any period of time. You know, it gets talked about as so foundational. So this person was correct in their email. This foundational teaching. Matter of fact, according to the traditional accounts, the first talk, Dharma talk, teaching that the Buddha gave was what's called the Four Noble Truths and the middle way. Middle way just means a balance of a path that's between overindulgence in sense pleasures on one hand and asceticism on the other hand. It's kind of going down the middle there. That's the basic idea there. So Four Noble Truths is, regardless of whether the Buddha actually did that as his first teaching, that's what Theravada Buddhism is bringing us. So it's a big deal. What are the Four Noble Truths? The first Noble Truth is dukkha. I mentioned that yesterday about one of the three characteristics, usually translated suffering. We spoke about that yesterday. But there's more in there. It's not just dukkha. The word clinging is in there. And it's the suffering that comes through, the word is upadana in Pali. So when we're clinging to the inherently unreliable and changing nature of things, that's when it's suffering. When we're not clinging. So the whole thing is the problem through the clinging that leads to the suffering. Second Noble Truth is what causes us to cling. And people often mistakenly think it's desire, and that Buddhism teaches desire is bad, but that's not true. Desires are all through the source teachings. If you didn't desire to practice, you wouldn't do it. It's not saying desire is bad. It's talking about a particular kind of desire, craving. The word in Pali, tanha, which is translated as thirst. You really get the sense of that kind of craving when there's that leads us to the clinging. And the third Noble Truth just says that there's an end to that craving. And then the fourth Noble Truth is the Eightfold path, which is a path of practice leading to that. By the way, as part of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path is divided into 3 sections. There's the Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. The Panya is the wisdom, the Sila is the morality. The Samadhi section, the whole meditative section is called the Samadhi section. That's giving you a little clue right there of the importance to help us actualize and really realize the Dharma profoundly. And I want to come back and spend some time on that. It's like, can we do it in a genuine way without the practices? You know, that's an interesting question. It's not a theoretical question. I actually like to think of that not as a question, but more, are you? How's it going with that? Everything okay? No suffering? Those of you who've been doing this 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years, how's that going? Could we use a little help or not? So this is kind of where we may want some practices to help us. I'm trying to be, okay, wasn't that funny? A little humorous. So Four Noble Truths, that can be a doorway in. But there are other realizations that we could have that might lead us the same way. And I'll just name a few things. I think this model of the asavas is a good one, of freeing ourselves from that. But also, it is taught, by the way, just to pause on the Four Noble Truths, that if that's your doorway, it is all you need. But there are other formulations, and I think the 3 characteristics, for example, it's related. They're all related because dukkha is in the Four Noble Truths. It's also the second of the 3 characteristics: impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and this no self teaching. So, but that's a way. So for other people, the insight might be directly into impermanence. Of course, it's related to the suffering that comes from clinging because things are impermanent. You can't come, but you may not be framing it that way in your mind. You may be just going directly to letting the truth of impermanence come in without really that framework of the Four Noble Truths. It's all the same thing. It's all a question of connecting again with what's real and true in experience without the intermediary of our stories and our filters and our views. And then when we see what's really true, letting go and letting life be is one way to think about it. So yes, I think the Four Noble Truths is a big deal. And if we could fully do it, it is considered all you would need. And so, yes, meditation's not Dharma. And meditation does not have to be used in service of Dharma. So first of all, well, there's someone like Ajahn Chah who would say, if you don't meditate, you're not going to be able to let go. Now, he was considered a great master. And so I certainly can't make a categorical statement about that for everyone. And it's true, I don't know what percentage it's probably a minority, but there are people out there. I don't know if Dr. Tintin is still around, but she was up in Sonoma, I think, Burmese teacher. And she was quite serious. She may still be with us. She was an example of someone where they really did not do, I don't think she would object if you did formal practices, but it wasn't about formal practices at all. It's really bringing these awarenesses, the wisdom, whether it's, I don't know how she framed it, Four Noble Truths or mindfulness or non-clinging, framing it in some way, just through your daily life. But she was they took it quite seriously. It wasn't like, oh yes, I use Dharma in daily life, but is an excuse to kind of just be caught up in things. I think they took it quite seriously. And I don't know the details about it. So that was an example of a contemporary person here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So definitely there are people who do that. And so we have to, I don't have an opinion. It wouldn't be for me to have an opinion, and I certainly don't. How can I know how the liberation is being actualized in everyone's mind? So I like to think of it, rather than saying, here's what you have to do. You need to meditate, you need to do that. I like to think of it as more of an invitation to look and see for ourselves how we're doing. Do we need some supports? What are the things that will support us to actualize it more? So one thing, going back to the Four Noble Truths, for example, there's different levels of understanding. We can have an intellectual understanding that can be quite profound, actually, not just say, oh, yeah, I got that, and then we kind of move on, where it actually makes some shifts in our lives. So that level of understanding, and maybe some of you know this for your own practice, and if you did nothing but decided to use, let's just take the Four Noble Truths as one system or one framework, and you did nothing but decide to keep that in mind as much as you could remember through your day, through your life, and use that wisdom to inform you, I have to think that would be deeply liberating, for sure. I think, again, I can't make a categorical statement for everyone, but I think this is what I believe would be true for most of us. There's more going on here than just the understanding. We have deeply conditioned habitual patterns in us. We all do. And so what is it that liberates the conditioning in our mind? Because you can know this, keep it in mind, but the right causes and conditions will come along and you will get reactive according to how your body somatically, your nervous system, your mind, your heart is set up, programmed, wired, if you will. So a big piece of what happens in these practices, this is the disentangling. We are shifting the conditioned patterns and ultimately liberating ourselves from our conditioning more and more. This is an important piece. And it may not be necessarily connected to your understanding. It may be just what's wired into your mind, your brain, your nervous system. And those patterns get in for lots of different ways. There's a whole other topic of how we get our conditioning. And sometimes it's clear to us in our upbringing, our childhood, we've had traumas, we've had whatever. Sometimes we don't know. It's just how we are, and it's not obvious. But we are who and what we are. So yes, the understandings is part of it, and we want to bring that in. And so this is an important point. The point the person was making here, I think, was very, very important. And again, I'm very appreciative of this. That is right about the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. And maybe it's all you need. My experience, I'm looking in my own life, but also, I mentioned the other day, one of the gifts, if you are in a teaching role or if you get to be in one, it's really just a wonderful privilege and a gift, because you get to connect with people and see and learn so many ways that we all work, and ways we're different, ways we're similar. And based on, I've worked with a lot of people for a lot of years, and I'll say that everyone I know, I think all would feel that some of the formal training, I think would say it was essential. But I can't sit here and say for every person whether it's essential for you. You have to look and see, do the experiment. What's it like if you don't do formal trainings? Check it out, see, and you'll know. How does it help you to actualize not just the Four Noble Truths, which it will, but also just the living heart of non-clinging, or the stream of non-clinging as a living force in your life, wakefulness. How is it supported? Maybe when you do some of the meditation practices. So you have to look to see for yourself. That's your answer, really. It's not for me or anyone else to tell us. We have to know our own truth. However, I would like to offer a few thoughts on that. And so now I'm going to shift over to the meditation side. That was about Dharma and non-clinging. And, it's a big, big topic, really. So since there are many ways to meditate, it's not just one way. So it's true what the person said here. Let me just read one of the, just one moment. Sorry, hang on a second. He's talking about, he says, it seems to me that one should be meditating on the Dharma to come to the realization of this. So first I want to say there are, and many of you know this, if you do Vapasana meditation, it's taught in many ways, probably hundreds and hundreds of different ways. It's not just one way. I think all of the ways that it's talked about do value the undistractedness, we could say the concentration, to a certain degree, at least enough to be a little more settled so we can be more present, right? It just helps us do the insight side of the work. But a lot of the practices actually have you purposely put your attention onto, say, impermanence. So you connect with experiences, and you not only, it could be your breathing, it could be what's happening in your body, sounds, moods, in a lot of different ways it's taught. You could either pick one or just stay open as the changing flow moves through your awareness. Whatever comes, sound, body sensation, another sound, emotion. There are a lot of ways it's taught. And one is just to be mindful of that. And the idea is that you're just connecting with impermanence and change, because you're just staying with as things are changing. And it's often taught you specifically look for the fact of change itself. You are doing what this person suggested. So it is taught to do that a lot. Or you do look for the suffering and the dukkha that comes from clinging. Or in the teaching of non-self, I mentioned it the other day, that's not an accurate, we're stuck with the word non-self because everyone uses it, but it actually is not accurate. It actually talked about no Atman or eternal soul it's talking about. But of course we have a self. It's more about what's the nature of the self, that it's a changing process. One of the images that's used on that, just to take a little side note here, is it's like we're a river, like a river of being or a river of experience. If you ever walk down to a river, it could be like a small stream, a creek, big river, and you stand on the bank and you look and you come back and you say, yep, okay, there's the river. You go away, come back the next day and you go, yep, there it is, same river. So in that sense, we know, yes, it is the same river, but there's none of the water in it's the same. It's all changed out. And if you were to stay there long enough, it would, over the years, it would deposit silts or erode some other silt. The banks wouldn't even be the same. There'd be actually nothing left of when the first time you came and looked at it. Completely changed out. But we come back and go, that's the same river. I think that's the idea about our own being a river of, so I don't want to go too much, that would be a whole talk on impermanence and emptiness and non-self, but that's kind of the idea. Not that you don't have a self, like we all have, so you don't have to go crazy about this non-self thing. But when you realize non-self, you're going to poof out of existence. And that's not what it's talking about. It's actually not trying to make ontological truth statements even about the nature of the self. It's in supporting us to let go of clinging to it. It's actually a tool in support, not trying to make a truth statement. I think in the later Mahayana, they shifted more to the ontological truth statements, but in Theravada, that may not be 100% accurate, but in the Theravada, it's really just to get us not clinging. So you can look for that. We can put our attention into our bodies and you can pick anything or just let the flow of experience come and go on its own. And we look to see that's all changing. That's an example. Or you do what I do. You just keep looking in the mirror. But don't do it every day because it tricks us, because you keep coming back and go, yeah, that's me. You do what I do when here in California, they renew the driver's license every 5 years. And years ago, I got my photo, went down to the Department of Motor Vehicles, got my photo taken, driver's license came. Okay, that's me. I put it in my wallet. 5 years later, I didn't have to go in. They just renewed it by mail, same picture, new driver's license come. Yep, that's me, put it in the wallet. That happened 3 times. It wasn't until it had been 15 years after the original photo came that I had to go down and get a new photo. So go down, get the new photo, comes back, and I pull out the old one, look at it, pull out the new one. It's like, what the heck is this? It's that same thing. Who is this old guy? Hold it up to the mirror. Oh my God. We use the body to teach us. So all these practices, we actually can turn towards them as practices, yes. So that's one way practice is talked about in the big universe of how we use it to support us to get more deeply. I want to say something on the Samadhi side also, because it's not just one way either. Some people, so for some people, they're aware of a sense of, I think I spoke about this yesterday in the talk about, it feels like they're having insights, whether they're turning their attention purposely, as we were just saying, to look for the insights into the understandings of the Four Noble Truths, insights into impermanence, the suffering that comes from clinging, all these different ways, looking for the Dharma there. Other times, these same kind of understandings and insights come from just on their own. I'll give you an example that happened to me. This was once I was on a long retreat. It was a many months long retreat. And I had a lot of Samadhi. I guess maybe this came out of the Samadhi. And one day, I remember this so clearly. It was really what you call an insight into impermanence. So right now, if I asked you to notice anything in your experience right now, you could look around, you see the screen, you look around the room where you are, indoors, outdoors, or whatever. You say, yeah, I notice whatever experience you're noticing, feeling in your body, something you're seeing or hearing. Then if I said to you, well, can you notice that your experience is changing? My guess is for many of us, you might say something like, well, now that I make a point of it, I mostly am noticing the experience, but if I make a point of it, yeah, I can be aware that it's changing. When I had that experience, that insight into impermanence, it flipped completely around. And it's going to sound kind of funny, but at the time it was just as matter of fact as can be. It was the experience of change was just popping out powerfully into my awareness. And if you asked me to make a point of it, I could say, well, yes, I can notice the experience itself. But it was just so powerful, just in the awareness of impermanence and change. That's an example of a profound insight right into impermanence. So those things can happen. I wasn't looking. That was different than consciously putting my attention on. It's just another of many ways that insights can come. And then there are people for whom, maybe all of us at some times, where the liberation it may come from some insights, but we're not aware of it. We don't experience it that way. That the mind just kind of slides into a stability and a non-reactive equanimity. It's the same non-clinging, non-identification, but we didn't experience it, at least, as coming from, we had some, oh, wow, I had this great understanding that led to things letting go. The letting go just sort of came in, and it wasn't connected to putting our attention on Dharma. It just came through this kind of stability. This gets back to some of the reasons of some of the other models and teachings are in there, like the 7 factors of enlightenment, like the 4 jhanas and everything, because these are just all other supports. See, all of these are important. We want to have an all of the above approach, that it's not one way or the other. And so the way I suggest we hold these is that we want to be, and we're here on this retreat, so we are getting exposed. I'm offering in a certain way, and maybe you go on other retreats with other meditation teachers, maybe you read some books, hear talks, whatever, and maybe you're exposed to other ways, but somehow we want to learn. And I use this image of more tools in our toolkit. So then as life progresses, as we change and grow, life changes, what's needed isn't always, and what supports us to actualize the living heart of the liberation through non-clinging, which is what we're really talking about, as something very alive, can be a lot of different ways. And then we do all the things the person's talking here. And then you go, yes, we want to contemplate the 4 Noble Truths, whether it's walking around in daily life. You will find, if you haven't already, that the more you do the formal meditation, the less spaced out on automatic pilot you'll be in daily life, and the more you can use daily life in exactly the way the person's talking about to reflect on those truths. So there's an example where meditation can help us right there. Even if you're not thinking the meditation itself is what's doing it, and you're just using daily life, well, the less spaced out and the more present and awake you are will serve you better even in that. Most people will find that will come out of some formal training. That's what I have found in my own experience. So that's another example. So this liberation can come in a lot of forms. It's not just one way. And so that's why also sometimes the Samadhi side can be very powerful, just to bring that stabilizing wakefulness so our perception is clear. So first of all, we're steadier and we're more present more of the time, but also our awareness of what's happening. So on subtler levels, we're able, this is another important point, it magnifies or strengthens our awareness. You could say our perception, our ability to understand. So, and this isn't something experiential. You can just do the experiment, keep meditating, see for yourself. And then we'll realize more deeply on subtler levels where we had been in clinging or caught in delusion in some way that maybe we hadn't realized. So that's why theoretically, I think you can separate these things out. Meditation, it doesn't have to be part of Dharma, but there is a reason why, what in my mind, when I think of the quintessential image in Buddhism, it's a monastic, a monk or a nun, sitting in meditation. That's the image that pops into my mind. It may not be your quintessential image, but certainly the formal practices have been given a preeminent, maybe not the only, I don't say preeminent, but a lot of emphasis over all these centuries, not just from the founder 2,500 years ago, but people who have practiced deeply since then, who've agreed and kept up these forms for a reason. There's a reason why Samadhi is not only the name of the third piece of the Eightfold path, which includes right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, that right Samadhi. So it's not only the name of that section of the three, but the crown jewel is the eighth, which is the right Samadhi. There's a reason, because it works. And probably for a lot of people, if they don't do practices, again, if you did nothing else, most of us, you may not know this, but if you have trouble keeping much of a daily practice going in your life, you got a lot of company. And you're not doing anything wrong. Most people, there are plenty of people who keep up I'm not saying they never miss, but a pretty regular daily practice. A lot of people do. I'm thinking most people just find it hard. You're not doing anything wrong. But you can see for yourself then if that's you, and maybe you don't have much samadhi and you're like most people, there is a tremendous benefit of just like this person says, keeping the Dharma teachings alive whenever you can remember. And that's not less than practice. That's all we can do anyway, right? When we're spaced out and we forget, you can't remember. And when you remember, I think every one of us are going to want to bring as much awareness, consciousness, kindness, skill to the moment as we can. So yes, you don't have to. There's no have-tos. At least here we are on retreat, so we see the value. But I want to bring two more pieces here as we get to the end of this talk. There's another piece that goes on in definitely on the samadhi side of the meditation. No, actually, I would say this, even if you're not emphasizing, there's something called purification of mind. It's a thing. And you don't hear it talked about a lot. I talk about it, but I'll talk about it on the samadhi side, and then on if you're doing practices that aren't emphasizing the samadhi. What it is that just by touching into these meditative states, just going in and hanging out in there, it really does have a purifying effect. I'm not saying that's all there is, and you don't need to do other insights, but it has its power of this disentangling and kind of rewiring. It's like, I think I said something the other day or this morning about, you put a stew on the stove and maybe you let it slow cook. So it's like a ripening happenings or a slow cooking that happens just by going in and out of these meditative states. So I'm not going to say more. It's a big topic on purification of mind, but that is actually a real thing. So that's a benefit also, so that these unwholesome, or we could say suffering generating patterns kind of can loosen I'm not saying that's sufficient all by itself, but it's also a part. But also, if you don't have any samadhi at all, just to sit and be present with yourself, actually, that's almost a heroic journey, because we think, oh, it's less than practice. No, when you've got good samadhi, it's easy. It feels great. You don't want that bell to ring. Now, it's true, there's a lot of power that's happening in the work you're doing, but you have the support of the samadhi. To sit and be present with yourself, even if you don't have much, you got a scattered mind, grouchy mind, uncooperative body. To learn to sit and be present with that, that's a purifying fire also. Many of you know this. So there is a purification process in whatever, whether you're emphasizing the samadhi or not, or doing insight practices in any of its form that happen here. So this is an important part also to deepen. And I'm not saying people don't come to their enlightenment without formal meditation. I just can't make any comment one way or another about that. But there is a reason, this I'm repeating, that there tends to be a lot of emphasis, even though meditation's not Dharma. And I want to give you just one last example. I was just speaking with someone today who's a longtime meditator, and actually has been, in his particular case, happens to be having a lot of powerful samadhi. And this is someone who has found exactly what I talked about. It made me think about it. That's why I brought it in here. That had the times of just dropping into these meditative states, and then was finding for himself, was reporting to me that it's carrying through, not that he's in the meditative state through his daily life, but the place of having a more equanimity and balance and a kinder heart was just naturally carrying through more. And really identified, he felt like it was coming right out of the practice. So that's an example of the non-clinging carrying through. But also was reporting to me today on some profound insights that came, both on their own and by being in the states of samadhi and then inclining the mind to look or even ask. Sometimes people will use words. Jack Kornfield teaches a style called wisdom resolutions, where we actually verbally, will request or ask for insights. So there's a lot of ways we can use the samadhi. And so it gets back to this last thing where I can see how samadhi meditation can clear the mind to understand Dharma, but I haven't heard it enunciated as a reason to meditate. Well, okay, so now you've heard it as a reason to enunciate. I can better see how insight meditation can lead to insights. So what I'm offering is it's all of the above have their place. And so it gets back to there's not a right or wrong, that we each find our own relationship with how much we're emphasizing samadhi, and then which of the many approaches to it do we engage in? How much do we feel like the way I've been speaking, I said it's kind of an artificial, but leaning on the insight side as we're speaking here. And then how much that's, we're finding our own balance with it all. So I'll end by just without the way I started, which is not making a statement about, yes, you need to meditate, no, or not even asking the hypothetical or maybe the theoretical, can you come to this just by having that understanding? The question is, let's all look to see, not can we, not ask the question, but what's actually real for us? And do we feel that the meditation, the formal trainings in any of its forms, whatever we relate to, are supporting us to deepen in the realization of those? And then we let that be our guide.